This is a 1-minute animation prepared by NOAA of old ice, the persistent ice in the Arctic Ocean from 1987 to 2014. And if they say that a picture's worth 1,000 words, I think this is worth even more. At the bottom, you see the years go by. The white ice is the old ice. Getting the picture? Pretty dramatic. That really makes the case of why we're here. By the way, several months ago, I was entering the Senate chamber behind Senator Murkowski and said, "I want to be the Arctic senator." And she said, "No, you can be the assistant Arctic senator." And so here we are. And in fact, we're having a hearing of the Energy Committee, of which Senator Murkowski is the chair, tomorrow morning. And it would be irony in the extreme if we ended up not being able to have our hearing because of 2 inches of snow in Washington. So as of now, anyway, we're certainly planning to have that hearing. You've heard all the data. I'm sure Senator Murkowski went over it. Probably many of you know it as well or better than I. But we're really in an extraordinary moment with the Arctic because the reduction of the sea ice has opened an area, a geographic area about the size of the Mediterranean Sea. So imagine that suddenly a modern day explorer has discovered the Mediterranean Sea with all the coastal property and the resources. But the difference between now and 100 or 500 or 300 years ago is that we have international norms and organizations, hopefully, that will help us to develop and work in this newly found space. It's as if a new continent has been discovered in this newly found space in peaceful and non-competitive ways. And that's really the challenge that we have before us. And it's a challenge that we need to be preparing for now. Now, none of us know for sure the direction of climate change, although I am one that believes, based upon the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere, 400 parts per million, the highest in 3 million years, and the correlation historically between CO2 and temperature, that the trend line, if you take the noise out, the trend line is warming. And the trend line is going to be less ice. And that means a lot of things. It means energy resources. It means habitat for animals. It means navigation. And you may say, why is a senator from Maine worrying about this? Well, if indeed the Northwest Passage appears, as it appears to be happening, Maine is the closest New England, the closest East Coast port to Asia. And the shipping time to go through the north rather than through the Panama Canal is days and days shorter. And we happen to have a port in Maine called Eastport, which is the deepest natural port on the east coast of the United States. I have been on a boat in the Eastport Harbor as far as from here to that flag, and the depth was 65 feet. That was, I mean, as far as, that was the shore. From this point to the flag, that's the shore. The depth right here is 65 feet. We are spending billions of dollars to move bridges and raise bridges and dredge harbors up and down the East Coast to achieve 50 feet of depth. We've got it. God gave it to us. And so that's one of the reasons that a senator from Maine has a direct interest in this, because this could turn into a major opportunity for us and for our country in terms of of shipping both in both directions. So it seems to me that what we really need to do, and why meetings like this are so important, is that in order to deal with this new continent that we're discovering, we need to start now preparing both the sociological, political infrastructure and the physical infrastructure to handle it responsibly and to maximize the benefit to the world's citizens. The sociological and political infrastructure I refer to are things like the Law of the Sea Treaty, which the United States ought to accede to. It will give us a guidance in terms of how to make some of these international decisions. In addition to that, of course, the United States is going to be the chair of the Arctic Council starting this spring, and the Arctic Council is going to have a role. The whole idea is to manage manage, maybe that sounds too command and control-y, but to deal with the change and the development of this region in peaceful ways that are positive for the residents of the region and for the residents of the world that are interested in this. So the political infrastructure is things like the Law of the Sea Treaty, like the Arctic Council. I believe that part of the political infrastructure should be that the United States should appoint an ambassador to the Arctic. We have a lead, Admiral Papp has been appointed by the administration to be our lead representative on the Arctic Council, but I think we should take the next step and have somebody of ambassadorial rank with some staff and support in order to focus our country's efforts in this region. Physical infrastructure, of course, Senator Murkowski talked about icebreakers. There's some dispute about how many there are. I think the minimum the Russians have, the number I've seen is 17. We have one. And we have one that's basically we're using for parts. It's not really usable. We have one medium and one heavy. And that's the infrastructure. Those are the roads. That's how we're going to maintain transit routes, and we don't have it. And we're not even close to having it. There's no direct path to achieving that level of infrastructure, and that's something that we just absolutely have to do. The United States has to lead this effort. Doesn't mean dominate, but lead. I return, as was mentioned, I'm on the Armed Services Committee, also the Intelligence Committee. That was Harry Reid's way of showing he had a sense of humor, is putting me on intelligence. But just recently, a small group of us went to Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Israel. And it's an amazing thing to be talking to Arab diplomats in a foreign country who use U.S. football images to describe what's going on. More than once, people said to me in these countries, what we need is for the United States to be the quarterback. I thought that was fascinating, that, this guy is in his, Saudi Arabian national uniform, in a sense, and says, and he's talking about, being the quarterback. That doesn't mean manage it, doesn't mean dominate it, but it means provide some level of leadership. And for example, by not joining the Law of the Sea, we're being the opposite of a quarterback in terms of leadership. So I think we do have to have, take some leadership on this. Now, of course, the other piece about the Arctic, before I get to additional things that I think we should do, is what it tells us about where the climate is going. I don't have much doubt. And there's a center at the University of Maine in Orono that studies climate, and particularly with particular reference to Greenland and the ice cores and the long history of climate. And I was up there a couple of years ago, and they used a word that I had never heard before in the climate debate, which frankly sent a shiver down my spine, and it may do to you. The word was abrupt. It turns out the history of climate change is not all gradual. I don't know about you, but you think of the glaciers and changes in temperature a degree every century and things go very slowly. It turns out the history of the ice ages is abrupt, a matter of a couple of decades, if that, from normal situation to ice coming down from Labrador and covering the eastern part of the United States. And we also think, I don't know about you, but I always thought of it as ancient, ancient thousands, who can remember, dinosaurs and glaciers? No. Where I live in Maine was under 10,000 feet of ice 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago was when, that was Egypt. That was human history. And there's 2 miles of ice on the coast of Maine. That's why it's so crenellated. There's a good word for you to look up. It's the top of a castle. The top of a castle that goes up and down. That's crenellated. The Maine coast is longer than the California coast because it's so crooked. And it goes in and out. And those were the glaciers came down. If you look at the map of Maine, you see this. You can practically see the glaciers scraping out the earth and creating all those points and islands, which are now very expensive and owned by people from out of state. But abrupt climate change, and that brings me to Greenland. Greenland has, I don't know the percentage, but it's an enormous percentage of the Earth's fresh water is in that ice cap in Greenland. And generally, climate change does not cause the oceans to rise because of ice dropping into it. If you think about it, if you drop a cube of ice into a Coca-Cola, it'll go up for a minute, but then the ice melts and it doesn't really change. It's temperature that raises. The water is bigger when it's warmer. That's what's raising it. However, if the Greenland ice sheet melts, ocean levels will go up 23 feet. I mean, that's just, I don't know the percentage, 50, 60, 70% of the world's population probably is within a 23-foot level of ocean rise. All the major cities of the world. Some countries like Bangladesh would essentially cease to exist. Florida would probably come close to ceasing to exist. And you've all seen those maps of what happens to major U.S. cities if ocean rises a meter or 2 meters. But if the ice cap in Greenland goes, it's an entirely different world climate situation and ocean levels. So we need to approach this in 2 ways, and I apologize for getting off on climate change, but I think it's an important part of this. Clearly, we have to try to slow that process down through getting away from fossil fuels, conservation, all the things that we're talking about. I just voted to uphold the president's veto on the Keystone Pipeline. Senator Mikowski voted the opposite way, but I voted. But we also need to figure out how to adapt. We need to take into account the fact that some of these changes are beyond our control and they aren't going to slow. We can't, even if we start now, it's going to be 50 or 100 years before the effects are being felt. So in the meantime, we have to learn to cope with the changes, one of which is the Arctic. So what do we have to do? Number one, we have to raise the profile of the Arctic as an important region of the world. That's why we have meetings like this, and that's why Senator Mikowski and I are starting the Arctic Caucus in the Senate. We're going to send out a letter tomorrow to try to get our colleagues interested in this. So it's got to be part of the national conversation. Number two is infrastructure, as I mentioned, things like icebreakers, but also we don't know, it's not mapped, it's not charted. We need to chart the undersea. I was up last year on a nuclear submarine under the ice in the Arctic Circle, and it's fascinating to realize when we were about 400 feet. When you're in a submarine under an ice pack, you have to worry about both the bottom and the top. Normally, you're in a submarine, you just worry about the bottom, but these guys were watching sonar of the top as well. You know that, and so that was quite an experience, and to come crashing up through the ice was really amazing. So the infrastructure, we need to know the routes. We need to know the obstacles. We need to chart it. And that in itself is going to take a considerable amount of time. Law of the sea I've mentioned. Making Admiral Papp or his successor an ambassador is something that I mentioned. That's political infrastructure, charting. We have to develop a security strategy. And this whole discussion probably would have been different 10 years ago. Because I don't know if you recall, it wasn't even 10 years ago. We were talking about I can't remember the term, a resetting of our relationship with Russia or something like that. Well, we're resetting it all right, but it isn't in the way we thought 10 years ago. So there's obviously a level of tension and a level of hopefully not confrontation, but at least competition. And as I mentioned, they are much better equipped to deal with this region than we are in terms of just a physical infrastructure. But we need, hopefully, and I find this in my work in foreign relations, we really need to work on compartmentalizing these issues. In other words, we're confronting Russia in Ukraine, but we're working with Russia on the Iranian nuclear threat, and we're confronting them in the Crimea, and we're working with them in the Arctic. Do you see what I mean? We can't just say they're our enemy and we're not going to work with you anywhere, because they, for example, were a key partner in getting rid of Assad's chemical weapons. Wouldn't have happened without the cooperation of the Russians. So we have to be thoughtful about how we draw the lines, and the Arctic is an area where I'm hoping we'll be able to work together in some kind of cooperative way. Exploration for natural resources is something that we're going to have to really pay attention to, and that gets into all the complicated questions of where's the continental shelf, how far out, is it a 200-mile limit, a 20-mile limit, where the national lines stop, because you've got Alaska, you've got Canada, Scandinavia, Iceland, and Russia. You've got a whole series of countries that have direct interests in that region. I think we need to strengthen the international bodies like the Arctic Council that can give us an opportunity to have a forum to work out a lot of these issues. And I don't want to leave the issue without talking about the people of that region. And Senator Mikowski talked about that. These are many people that have been there for 1,000 years or more. And I think their interests and backgrounds and experiences need to be taken into account as we move into this new region. But I think my main message is that we're discovering a new continent, but we're doing it at a time of hopefully some level of international cooperation that will enable us to develop. Have you noticed I've gotten all the way to this point without using the word exploit? I'm not going to use that word. To develop and work together for the good of all of our peoples, of all of our countries, in order to take advantage of the benefits and assets that this new development poses for us. So I will look forward to working with Senator Mikowski. As I say, we're having a hearing tomorrow. One of the witnesses is coming from Maine, who's on the Maine Port Authority. And the number of ships coming through it's declined somewhat in 2014, but it's increasing significantly. But we've got to work out what the rules of the road are. What are the rights in the Bering Strait? And where are the limits of national jurisdiction? What is international waters? How are we going to regulate those? The right of safe passage, of innocent passage, and it's a enormous challenge, but it's also an enormous opportunity. Does anybody here speak Chinese? I think the word in Chinese for crisis is two symbols that put together, and the two symbols, one stands for danger, and the other stands for opportunity. Isn't that interesting? Crisis, danger, and opportunity. And it seems to me, I wouldn't elevate this to a crisis, but it seems to me that this is an enormous opportunity for not only the United States, but the peoples of the world. And I'm just hoping that we can find the way forward in a peaceful, thoughtful, and meaningful way for all of our citizens. And I certainly intend to maintain my involvement in this issue with Senator Murkowski, Senator Cantwell from Washington, and others, and we certainly are going to try to convince others of our colleagues of the importance of this issue. What we're dealing with here is change. This is change on literally a global scale. And I'll leave you with the most profound observation about how to deal with change that I've ever encountered. On December 2nd, 1862, Abraham Lincoln came right here to Congress. And he was trying to get across to the Congress the fact that the Civil War was something new and different. It wasn't politics as usual. The Congress, not surprisingly, was treating it as politics as usual. And he was trying to shake them out of this lethargy of you know, we're going to pass bills and maybe we'll do this and maybe we'll authorize that, and things were slowing down. And he was talking about how we have to face this incredible period of change. And he ended his remarks with what I consider, as I mentioned, the most profound observation about how to deal with changed circumstances that I've ever encountered. Here's what Abraham Lincoln said. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty. Therefore, we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves, and then we shall save our country. We must disenthrall ourselves, think in different ways, and then we shall save our country. Thank you all very much.